Welcome to the Human Design Profiles, an entrepreneurship podcast. I'm your host, Chantal, a 1-3 manifesting generator, a workshop facilitator for service providers, and the writer of a book series for every facet of your small business journey. This podcast is my active learning experiment where I am discovering with my guests how we experience entrepreneurship on an individual level while we're also satisfying our desire for self-awareness. It's very true to my profile as a 1-3. I'm just trying to figure it all out. Each episode is a profile of a human design enthusiast / business owner. Today, we're talking with a human design expert who is here to share about how their personal profile lines influence their business journey. Today, my conversation is with Krystle, a human design reader and intuitive. She guides people to taking back their power to reaching their fullest potential. Krystle has been in her experiment for almost 7 years now and is here to make the human design system more digestible to use in everyday life. Have a listen while today's guest, Krystle, a 1-3, shares her story while you read between the lines. Krystle, you love to go deep into human design, which obviously feels like a one-line trait. Tell me a little bit about that.
I've always been just really investigative in my life process. I feel like I've heard about this, that the 1-3 profile is one of the most spiritual profiles out of all of them. And I've always been into some sort of spirituality. Obviously, most people start out with astrology. So I was deep into that for a very long time. Back in the day when they would email you your horoscope for the next day, I would always wait till midnight and I would check my email to get my horoscope for the next day. Just because I feel like as a first line, we're always searching for that security and that foundation. And so I feel like the cosmos, I've just always been deeply connected to them, that they've always been my guide. So I've just been a deep dive into investigating all things spiritual.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a process for how you take the things that you learn and how you maybe transmute them before you disseminate that knowledge through your work, through your content?
Yeah, I think I always have to bring it back to myself. I feel like the 1-3 profile, it's on the lower trigram. We're very self-absorbed and we kind of have to be. So I always have to run it through my personal experimentation. And if it works for me, I also, to bring it back to another third line, because all the lines run through pretty much everything in human design. I'm also power, view, and desire motivation. So I really am able to then see, okay, how could this not only work just for me, but how could I make it work for other people too? Like the bigger picture. I also have a completely open head and an undefined ajna. So it always has to start with me. And I feel like as a 1-3, it should always start with you. But then it's like, how do I incorporate it in other people's success? That's what the third line really means. It's 3D success. So yeah.
Oh, I love that interpretation. Is there anything that you feel called to investigate at the moment? Any one-line passion that you're diving into right now?
That's a really great question. I have all, I have so many. I
Feel free to
really
list
got,
them all.
yeah, I feel like this past year is where I can really see more of, I guess, the moving parts through the experimentation of what I've been doing for a long time. I've been really getting into sacred geometry and also creating that sacred space, like in your home, in my office. I have an altar. And so I'm really into, I even actually figured out how to create a sequence with your bodygraph
Oh, very
chart.
cool.
And so I actually had someone that sculpts locally. She makes crystal grids. I asked her if she could turn my body graph into a grid. And so she did.
Everyone listening is going to want one of those.
I did trial and error out a little Facebook community because I also do the transits. I have a podcast on human design, astrology, and tarot, and like the thread that runs through, and we travel through 2 weeks of the time of the podcast. And so I created a group around that and I showed them the grid, and then they all bought the grid from her because she's also a sacral generator like me. She's a 6-2 though, and she has touch cognition, and she has a whole ritual that she does with the clay and the water and putting it all together. And that it's like you can feel when you hold the grid that there's something sacred in the grid itself aside from your body graph. So
Wow. That is making my one line go like ping.
I know. I'll show you a
I want to
picture
check it
after
out.
if you want to
Yeah,
see it.
I absolutely do. Okay, I
I
could
know.
go so many questions.
I know.
Do you have a practice for turning some of these passions into offers throughout your
Oh yeah.
business?
Oh
Tell
yeah.
us about that.
Yeah. I have the channel of surrender, which is also known as the channel of the entrepreneur.
Mhm.
And what I've realized for myself, it's all about intuitively knowing how to sell. It's like really looking at patterns. I have a little bit of a psychology background. I originally started there, and then I went and did hair and makeup for a little bit, or for a long time, 14 years. And then I transitioned to this, but it's always been for me about patterns. And so it's like, how can I help people really look at the patterns of self to then unlock portals of who they've come here to actually be? So it started for me. My first guide that I ever created was, and I still have it, we actually just recently updated. It's called the User Manual to Your True Self. I look at it as what's missing. That's what I say to myself. First question is, what's missing in the human design space that could really elevate somebody's life? When it comes to the language of human design, and that's the beginning, and also being a 1-3, the foundation is how can I build people a foundation to elevate their life? And I realized there's not enough information around the language around human design, what all these intricate details, like what is the magnetic monopole? What is your profile? What are all these authorities? All really minute details. I also have gate 9 in my conscious Mercury. So I'm always looking for the details that light me up. And so I had to ask myself, how, with that channel of surrender, how can I take the language of human design and make it more digestible to sharing it with my child? And so that's when I actually called in my business partner, who's a projector. She actually bridges all of my hanging gates,
Oh,
most of
that's
them.
fun.
Yeah. And so she took all of the information that has been marinating up here, and then she put it into form and like creating very digestible ways to like understand, what does the magnetic monopole actually look like? What is happening to you? And then images, because the internet, as we know, especially with human design, as it's blown up the last few years, really overwhelming, confusing, and just an assortment of misinformation. So everything as a 1-3, I'm sure same thing with you, it has to be foundation. I always go to source. The amount of lectures that I have of Ra Uruhu and his classes is probably unfathomable to most people, but I can just listen or read what he's saying, and then I take the important details and then make it easy for, like I said, a child to understand. And really, I'm not watering it down because there's still the foundation there, but it's just an easier language to understand, because I do believe that Ra kind of speaks in riddles.
Mhm.
So I do understand the Riddler, I guess I could say.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect a 1-3 to ever water down anything. That's the
No.
opposite of what we're here for, really. At least the opposite of what it feels like for me. It was
Yeah.
interesting to me when you mentioned that focus on language. I wonder if that's something that possibly one lines have in common. I've often felt called to create some kind of glossary, the concept of small business entrepreneurship. I just think there's so many terms thrown out there that if you're in your first couple of years, you have no idea. And obviously, the same thing applies to human design, right? It's such a vast system. It takes years to figure out what even all of those words mean. And that's an interesting similarity, I think, that focus on language. A one line is intrigued by because it's one of the primary ways that we're gathering that knowledge.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we're always looking for, how can I help others build a proper foundation?
Mhm.
And it's like we have to investigate it. And then, well, a lot of times we're really trial and erroring out. And then it's like going back to like, okay, where did I miss something? And then digging,
Mhm.
digging, digging. With human design, what I've realized, like basically 7 years into my experiment now, there's no bottom. There's literally no bottom. And then even if you, let's say, get every resource possible from Raw or from IHDS or wherever you're getting your information from, then there's the mutative process that happens to you and the growth that happens through that. So that's where it's like you're constantly learning, because all this is an experiment.
I could not agree more. Because you're never going to run out of life experience to mine from. That doesn't stop. And then there's other people's experiences to mine from. And so I think you're right. There's currently a finite amount of text-based resources or
Mhm.
like video-based resources, but there is no finite limit to the human experience of those concepts.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Which is so exciting to us as one threes.
Yeah, I think that's why I have loved this system more than any other system. I like to tell people, if you want to know the secrets of life and really the secrets of self, this is your one-stop shop because it's literally everything, even the global programming, the global cycles. You can look at past history and you can see exactly how human design fits into that and gives you the proper explanation of what energetically is actually happening.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing. You mentioned earlier about the magnetic monopole. I've known about human design for 6 years. I've never encountered that term. And
Really?
I'm wondering if maybe people who are listening have never heard of it either. Can you tell us a little bit about that concept?
Sure. So the magnetic monopole is actually the most mysterious part of who we are as humans. After 1781, we mutated into nine-centered beings from seven-centered beings. That's where the
Mhm.
seven chakras come from. We originally oriented making decisions from our mind, which people are still making decisions from. They haven't realized, or we haven't, I guess, been taught, really realized and then been taught that we actually have mutated into a place of making decisions through our body. And that's what human design gives you, a chance to get out of your mind and come back into the body. And so what is actually happening is the heart chakra mutated into that little heart triangle. If anybody's looking at their human design body graph, highly recommend pulling it up because so that you can see the little places. The heart chakra mutated into a little tiny triangle. It's colored in red if you're defined, or white if you're open or undefined. And then it's actually then reaching for through that 2551, the channel of initiation, for the G center, which holds everything. It houses everything: love, purpose, direction, identity, and connected to your environment. And that's where the magnetic monopole comes from. It sits, if anybody's watching the video right now, I'm just going to point to it. It might be hard to see because I'm wearing a black shirt, but it sits right below where your sternum is. And that's actually gate 2, which is your higher self. And that's where the magnetic monopole, it's one pole, and its only role is to attract. And so what it's doing is it's attracting everything, every life experience, every person. I love sacred geometry and fractals. It's pulling in your fractal family and all of your experiences that you're here to have. And it's the most mysterious part of us because it really creates the illusion of separateness. That's what we're all experiencing now, being separate of self, being separate of the whole, because that's all we are. We are just fragments of one whole. And so the magnetic monopole is the part of us that's really carrying us on our journey through life.
That gives me a
Yeah.
lot to deep dive into. That's very powerful. You mentioned that variables was something that is particularly dear to you. You have a program on it. It's your favorite topic. Why does variable grab you in that way?
Oh my gosh, how much time do we have? I'm going to give just a quick rundown. I have to back up way far to when I first started my hair and makeup career. I eventually figured out how to create my own little salon suite. I had a client that wanted me to do her hair on a day that I had off. And as generators, we can tend to be slaves to other people and the people pleasing. So long story short, I was close to my salon. I had just bought this bike and I'm like, I'm just going to ride my bike over there. It's going to be a little bit of exercise and then I'll ride it back. Long story short, I got hit by a car on my bike and I almost died.
Oh,
And
no.
so, yeah, it's that we won't go into that experience, but what it eventually led me to was Kaballah. I ended up accidentally 1-3 working there for 3.5 years that I called my spiritual pause in between the hair and makeup. After I had left there, that is when I bumped into human design and realized that that was the reason why I was at the Kaballah Center that whole time. I had no idea why I was there. Just like having a defined G center, and I'm also a vessel of love. I feel like I don't always know where I'm going, but I trust that I'm in the right place.
Mhm.
And so it was after that, I did a whole deep dive into human design. I had a little bit of background with Kabbalah. And so then I did, obviously, as every 1-3 does, buys every single possible book you could find, takes every possible course that you could take. And then 3 years after that, I came online with human design. And it was during that time that I had also found the variables, which are the 4 radical transformations. They are literally your unique path to purpose. And I look at it almost like your internal algorithm. If you can follow that path, it'll actually take you to your correct environment. And so I was actually in my incorrect environment growing up. I'm kitchen's environment, and I was
Me
in
too.
my Oh, you are? Wow. Okay, we could have a whole conversation on that. I was in my resistant environment of shores because there's an opposing wherever there's color you can transfer. I began experimenting with that time to get to my correct environment. And I began eating for my determination, which is calm. That was when the world had shut down. And I was like, oh, this is my time. I can finally not eat around people anymore. Cognition, which is our cognitive potential, our unique intelligence. We have two places in our determination, which is connected to our brain. And then we have our motivation, which is connected to the mind. And it's through cognition that eventually I look at them as almost like a little roadmap that will lead you to your correct motivation. And so I started as every 1-3 does. I took it to the extreme. I started really experimenting with it, and I figured out that how to actually get to my correct environment. And I actually moved in the middle of the pandemic to Asheville, North Carolina. And it was the smoothest move I've ever made. I've never moved out of state before. Again, we have in order to actually deliver an offer, we have to go through the experience first. So it was when I got here, I realized, wow, I could really help other people do this. I could really help It was when I got here that everything changed for me. I started making more money. I started meeting the correct people. I started feeling just like really at the core whole. That was when I started to put together with my business partner offers around the variables. And then after we put out our first, we actually still have them up. We have little a la carte mini classes, more digestible, because again, variables are, if you think human design's confusing, wait till you get to the variables. That's when it gets real confusing. And so we made them these bite-sized offers so people could just take in their own personal experience. And so then that worked. And then I was like, well, now we have to take it to the next level. Why don't we build a membership around it? So we tried that. And it was 6 months too long. I realized the open undefined hearts could not hang with us. And my business partner also has the channel of surrender. That's her authority. She's a splenic projector. And so we're like, okay, I said, what if we condensed it? What if we condensed all of this into a 5-week intensive? And so we did our first round last spring, and it went phenomenal. And I watched people just really click into place. Some people moved, some people found a relationship, some people elevated their career. And I was like, oh my gosh, we got to do this again. So then we did it. We're actually in the middle of the second round right now. It's only 5 weeks and it feels like one. And which is probably good for the open undefined hearts, because again, no offense to any open undefined heart, you just can't hang for too long. Just the commitment, you get loosey goosey about it, and that's fine. But this then motivates you after that to then start really experimenting, because really the intensive is just the beginning. So yeah, I hope I answered your question the most long-winded answer as possible.
No, I loved it. I find for me as a 1-3, I like to offer things and then offer them again, like the rounds aspect. It just feels really natural for me. Is there anything that changed between round 1 and round 2? And is there anything in round 2 that you want to change for round 3?
Yes. I added 2 extra experiments. We have it where you get all of our recorded classes from the original a la carte offers that we still have up. And then we only give cognition, which is connected to your determination. So we give those, and then environment, but view or perspective, whichever way you want to call it, and motivation. I found from the membership version that that's where they get lost. Like eating for your unique style and like being in the right environment, that I've realized makes more sense to people after
I would agree with that.
With all that.
Just how I've experienced my own chart.
Yeah. But once you move over to the mind, whoa, it's like everybody's lost. Everybody's lost. And so I could not, in good conscience, make that an a la carte self-paced offer, because then people would be very, very confused. I have to be working with these people. So that changed from the membership version. And then for the second round that we're in now, I found an extra layer to determination that it's like this very like, can I tell a little secret?
Sure.
Maybe you want to experiment with it. I'm not, but Ra talked about it, and he goes off on tangents. There's a PHS lecture that I found from somebody that said, if you are left brain and connecting to thirst on the left side, you would be hot thirst. On the right side, you'd be cold thirst. And as we talked about, the third line really represents success. And that's what thirst is. It's a third color. And so he said that if you are left brain to experiment with eating and drinking warmer liquids, really more warmer liquids since it's thirst, but like going on the warm side. And I realized when I moved here that I started to do that. I stopped wanting anything to do with ice. I'm left brain. And so I realized, I'm like, I think there's a pattern here. There is something to what he's saying. And so I added that experiment to this round, and people have really taken it to the next level, where a right brain person said they're taking cold showers. And they said when they take cold showers, something stimulates their body. That's what it's supposed to do. And so definitely doesn't happen overnight. And definitely even through the 5 weeks, I put it as an experiment for the first day to start to see how people are at the end of 5 weeks. But I really think it's probably at least a good few months of experimenting with that to really see some results. But I'm like actually right now drinking a hot coffee. Anytime I go on interviews or lectures or sessions with people, I always have a warm tea or coffee. And so someone that's right brain, they would do ice, like an iced coffee or something like that. And it'll stimulate you and like decondition just a little bit more so that your brain can either focus or allow for the passive right brain people.
Okay, so much for us all to play with. If anyone's interested in variable, you definitely want to check out the third round coming up in the spring. So last question before we go into our affirmation card ritual. Is there anything that you would particularly recommend for 1-3s? Maybe embodied experiences that you'd recommend?
Yeah, embodied experiences. I have so many tools. I think when it comes to 1-3s, you need to know the information. You need to know like the person that you're working with. You need to know your surroundings. You need to know your environment, and really getting clear on where you are now to know where you're going. Being able to have those like safety tools. For me, it goes deeper than just my profile. And I know we're only talking about I know we went to a lot of different directions, but we're only talking about profile. But I would ask a 1-3, what tool do you have that helps you feel safe? What tool that you've already done some sort of experiment with? Like for me, like example, my like sacred geometry and my like crystal grids and stuff. That's something that I've experimented with that brings me a sense of safety and comfort. Whenever I'm going to do something new, I need to ask like 5 million questions to know if it's something that I even want to do. So I think it's something that feels familiar. Like what feels familiar to you and where do you feel safe? And those are either the experiences, the people, or the tools that you're going to pull from. And we're all different. So for me, it really comes back to my rituals.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. We'll flow now into the closing ritual from this episode. So together we'll take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. The card that I've pulled for you today reads, "There is no such thing as a mistake. It is all discovery. Can I release the shame or fear I feel around making mistakes?"
Nothing's a mistake. It's just an experience, really.
Lovely. Krystle, I am so grateful that we were able to chat today. I know that everyone is going to be Googling after listening to this episode, and we want them to find you. Where can they go to do that?
So on Instagram, I'm Journey Through HD is my primary account. And then I also have Human Design Astro Club collectively with my business partner. And then the best place to get everything, because I also have a podcast and a YouTube channel and million things offers for people of all sorts of flavors, on humandesignastro.com.